Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he looked at the shelter he had built. 3 weeks in the Montana wilderness with nothing but a knife and his clothes, and he felt more alive than ever. The shelter was perfect, made from fallen branches and bark strips he had carefully peeled from dead trees. Every piece had been placed with purpose, creating a warm, dry space that would keep him safe through the night. He had come out here to test himself, and to write his book about old ways of living in the wild. Jake taught people how to survive without modern tools, how to make fire with sticks, how to find food in the forest, and how to build homes from what nature provided. For 20 years he had been learning these skills, first from his grandfather who had lived through hard times, then from books and practice and teachers who still knew the old ways. The sun was getting low, and Jake needed to start his evening. Fire. He had been practicing the bow drill method for the past few days and was getting faster at it each time. He gathered his tinder bundle, dry grass, and birch bark that would catch the smallest spark and set up his fireboard. The wood was cedar, soft enough to create the hot dust he needed but hard enough to make good friction. Jake placed the wooden spindle in the notch he had carved and began to turn it with the bow he had made from a bent branch and plant fiber. String. Back and forth, steady pressure, feeling the wood warm under his hands. He could smell the wood dust heating up and saw the thin line of smoke rising from the fireboard. Almost there, that was when the lights appeared. At first Jake thought it might be a helicopter, maybe search and rescue looking for someone lost in the woods. But the light was wrong, too bright and too steady, and there was no sound of rotors cutting through the air. Instead, there was a low humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once, making his teeth ache and his skin feel strange. Jake looked up through the trees and saw something that made no sense. A huge, dark shape hung in the sky above him, blocking out the stars. Lights moved across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at. The humming got louder and Jake felt the hair on his arms stand up like he was near lightning. His survival training kicked in. When something dangerous happens in the wild, you observe first, then act. Jake noted the direction of the wind, still coming from the west. He marked the position of the Big Dipper through a gap in the trees so he would know which way was north. He checked his knife was still on his belt and made sure he knew where his water bottle was tied to his pack. The light from above got brighter and Jake felt something pulling at him, like invisible hands trying to lift him off the ground. He grabbed onto a tree trunk, but the pulling got stronger. His feet left the earth, and he found himself rising up through the branches, still holding his half-finished fire kit. Jake had read about strange lights in the sky and people who claimed to have been taken by visitors from other worlds. He had always thought those stories were made up or mistakes. But as he floated upward toward the impossible thing hanging in the darkness, he realized some stories might be true. The pulling force made his whole body feel numb and heavy. Jake tried to move his arms, but they would not obey him. His vision started to get fuzzy around the edges, and his thinking became slow and thick like honey. But even as his mind grew foggy, the part of him that had learned to survive in dangerous places kept working. He noticed the taste of metal in his mouth and the way the humming changed pitch. As he got closer to the strange craft. The last thing Jake saw before everything went black was an opening appearing in the bottom of the ship, edges glowing with the same painful light. He was pulled inside and felt solid floor under his body. Shapes moved around him, tall and thin and wrong somehow, making sounds like singing, but in no language he had ever heard. When Jake woke up, he was lying on a flat surface that felt warm and smooth like glass. The air smelled clean but strange, like it had been washed too many times. Bright light came from everywhere and nowhere, making it hard to see properly. His head hurt and his mouth was dry, but he seemed to be unhurt. Jake sat up slowly and looked around. He was in a small room with walls that looked like they were made of silver metal. There were no windows or doors that he could see, just smooth walls that met each other in perfect corners. The floor under him was the same material, warm to the touch and slightly soft. On the other side of the room, something shimmered in the air like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Jake stood up carefully and walked toward it. When he got close, he felt a tingling on his skin and saw tiny sparks of light dancing in front of him. He reached out to touch it and pain shot through his fingers like touching a live wire, a barrier of some kind. Keeping him trapped in this strange room, through the shimmering wall, Jake could see shapes moving back and forth. They were tall, much taller than any person, and thin like stick figures. Their skin was pale blue like ice, and their heads were too big for their bodies. They wore clothes that seemed to be made of the same silver material as the walls. One of them stopped and looked at Jake. Its eyes were huge and dark, taking up most of its face. It made musical sounds to the others, and they all turned to stare at him. Jake stared back, his mind racing. These were not human beings. These were something else entirely, something from somewhere else. Jake had spent his whole life learning how to survive in places where humans were not meant to be. He had faced bears and storms and freezing cold and burning heat. He had been lost and hurt and scared before. But this was different. This was a place no human survival guide had ever written about, but Jake Morrison was not just any human. He was a man who had learned to make tools from rocks and fire from sticks. He was someone who could read the weather in cloud shapes and find water by watching where birds flew. He could build shelter and find food and make his way through trackless wilderness using nothing but his knowledge and his hands. The aliens who had taken him thought they had captured a helpless primitive creature from a backward world. They had no idea what they had really done. They had taken a human who knew how to turn any environment into a home and any challenge into an opportunity. Jake looked around his prison again, this time not as a scared captive, but as a survivor sizing up new territory. The walls, the floor, the strange barrier, even the aliens themselves, they were all just another kind of wilderness to learn and master. The real test was just beginning. The tall blue beings moved around outside Jake's prison like doctors studying a sick animal. They held devices that beeped and hummed and flashed with colored lights. One of them, wearing what looked like extra decorations on its silver clothes, seemed to be in charge. It pointed at Jake and made long musical sounds to the others. Jake sat perfectly still and watched everything. In the wilderness, the first rule was to observe before you act. Animals that moved too fast or made too much noise became food for predators. Right now, Jake was the prey, so he needed to think like prey thinks, careful and smart and patient. The leader alien came closer to the shimmering wall. It held up a device and pointed it at Jake. Lights ran up and down the device, and it made soft clicking sounds. Jake felt a warm, tingling sensation move across his body from his head to his feet. They were examining him somehow, probably learning about human bodies. After a few minutes, the alien made satisfied sounds and walked away. Jake had learned something important from watching. The device only worked when pointed directly at him, and the alien had to be quite close to the barrier. That meant their scanning tools had limits. Every tool had limits, even the most advanced ones. Jake started his own examination of his new environment. The air tasted slightly different from Earth air, cleaner but also thinner somehow. He breathed carefully and noticed his heart was beating a little faster than normal. Either there was less oxygen here, or the air pressure was different. His body would adapt in time. Humans were good at adapting to new places. The room was about 12 feet square and 8 feet high. The walls met the floor and ceiling in perfect smooth curves with no sharp corners anywhere. Jake ran his hands along every surface he could reach. The material was definitely metal, but unlike any metal he had ever felt. It was warm, but not from any heat source he could detect. When he pressed on it hard, it gave slightly, like it was alive. The barrier that kept him trapped was the most interesting thing in the room. Jake studied it carefully without getting close enough to be shocked again. It made a very faint sound, almost too quiet to hear, like wind through pine needles. The shimmering effect was strongest at the edges and weaker in the middle. That told him the barrier was created by some kind of projector, probably built into the walls or floor. Jake lay down and put his ear to the floor. Through the strange metal he could hear sounds, vibrations that told him about the ship around his prison. There was a steady low humming that was probably engines or power systems, footsteps of the aliens walking on other levels, the sound of air moving through pipes or tunnels. This ship was big, much bigger than his room. After what felt like several hours, one of the aliens returned carrying a container. It did something to a panel Jake had not noticed before, and a small opening appeared in the barrier. The alien pushed the container through the opening and then sealed it again. Inside the container was what looked like gray mud. Jake examined the food carefully. It had no smell and felt slightly warm. He touched a tiny amount to his tongue and waited. No burning or numbness. He tried a slightly larger amount and waited again. The taste was bland, like eating cardboard, but it did not seem harmful. Jake ate about half of the gray substance and saved the rest. In survival situations, you never ate everything at once. In case it was your last food for a long time, the aliens returned several more times to stare at him and point their devices in his direction. Jake let them look while he continued his own studies. He had noticed that the lighting in his room grew dimmer and brighter in a regular pattern, probably matching day and night cycles. The aliens seemed to be less active during the dim periods, which meant they probably slept like humans did. During one of the bright periods, Jake started what looked like random exercise. He did push-ups and jumping jacks and stretches, moving around his small space like a caged animal might. The aliens watched with interest, probably thinking he was upset or bored. What Jake was really doing was testing every inch of his prison. He found that the barrier was weaker near the floor and stronger near the ceiling. The walls were thicker in some places than others, creating tiny variations in the humming sound when he tapped them. The floor had hairline seams running in a pattern that suggested how the room had been built. Every detail was information he might need later. Jake also tested his own body carefully. The strange food gave him energy but made his stomach feel odd. The air made him slightly dizzy if he moved too fast. The metal floor was hard on his bare feet but not cold. He was adapting already, learning how to exist in this alien environment. On what he guessed was his second day in captivity, Jake made an important discovery. While doing his exercises, he noticed that pressing on certain spots on the walls made the humming sound change slightly. The walls were not solid metal all the way through. There were hollow spaces behind them, probably containing the systems that ran the ship. Jake had spent years learning how things were built and how they worked. Cabins and shelters, water systems, and electrical wiring all followed basic rules, even when they were made with advanced materials. This alien ship was just another kind of building, and every building had weak points if you knew how to find them. During the next dim period, Jake lay still and listened to the ship around him. He was learning its rhythms, the way sounds changed when the aliens were active or sleeping, how the power system cycled up and down when maintenance work was done in other parts of the vessel. This ship had patterns just like a forest had. Patterns, and Jake was very good at reading patterns. The aliens brought him food twice during each bright period. They were studying him, but they were also keeping him healthy, which meant they planned to keep him alive for a long time. That gave Jake time to plan, but it also meant he was probably very far from Earth by now. No rescue was coming. If he wanted to get home, he would have to rescue himself. Jake began making tools from the few things he had. Threads pulled carefully from his clothes could be woven into stronger cord. Small pieces of the food container, broken off when the aliens were not watching, could be shaped into cutting edges. His belt buckle could be taken apart to make small metal implements. None of these tools were much by themselves, but Jake had learned to make incredible things from simple materials. He had built traps that could catch fish using nothing but sticks and plant fibers. He had made cutting tools from broken glass and stone flakes. He had started fires and rainstorms using techniques older than written history. The aliens thought they had captured a primitive human who would be helpless without his technology. They saw his simple clothes and basic tools and assumed he was like a wild animal, dangerous only because he did not know better. They had no idea that Jake represented something much more dangerous than an advanced civilization could ever be. Jake Morrison was a human who remembered how to be human. He carried in his mind and hands the knowledge that had let his species survive, ice ages and droughts and disasters that had destroyed other creatures. He knew how to adapt and overcome and thrive no matter what environment he found himself in. As Jake lay in his alien prison listening to the ship move through space, he was not planning an escape. He was planning a conquest. This ship and everything in it was about to become his new wilderness, and Jake Morrison had never met a wilderness he could not master. On his third night aboard the alien ship, Jake was ready to make his move. He had spent days studying every detail of his prison and the patterns of his captors. The aliens followed strict schedules, like most advanced civilizations did. They checked on him at regular times, brought food twice per day cycle, and ran their ship systems according to precise routines. Jake had learned that the barrier, keeping him trapped, was powered by a device hidden somewhere in the wall near the entrance. During the ship's night cycle, the barrier grew slightly weaker, probably to save energy. The aliens were efficient, but that efficiency had created a weakness Jake could exploit, using threads pulled carefully from his shirt and small pieces broken. From food containers, Jake had created a simple tool. It looked like nothing more than twisted fibers and bits of plastic, but Jake had designed it based on principles he had learned from studying electrical systems and traditional trapping methods. The tool was meant to create a focused drain on the barrier's power source. Jake waited until the deep part of the night cycle when the ship was quietest. He could hear through the walls that most of the aliens were in their rest areas. Only a few were still moving through the corridors, probably maintenance workers or guards. This was his best chance. Jake approached the barrier and located the exact spot where the power field seemed weakest. He had tested this area many times by holding his hand close enough to feel the tingling but not close enough to trigger pain. Now he pressed his improvised tool against the barrier at precisely the right point. For several minutes nothing happened. Then Jake felt the tool grow warm in his hands, and the shimmering in the air began to flicker. The barrier was being drained of power faster than its generators could supply it. The effect spread outward from where Jake was working until the entire wall of energy became unstable. When the barrier finally collapsed, Jake was ready. He did not run toward the door or try to break down walls like the aliens probably expected. Instead, he dropped to the floor and crawled toward a ventilation grate he had located near the corner of his cell. The grate was designed to be opened from the outside for maintenance, but Jake had spent years learning how to open things that were supposed to stay closed. Jake's knife, which the aliens had left him because they thought it was a primitive tool, worked perfectly for prying open the grate. Within seconds he was inside the ship's air circulation system, crawling through passages that were just large enough for a human body. The aliens had built their ship for efficiency, not security against primitive infiltration. Moving through the ventilation system was like traveling through a three-dimensional map of the ship. Jake could feel air currents that told him which directions led to large open spaces and which led to smaller rooms. He could hear sounds through the walls that showed him where the aliens were located. Most importantly, he could reach areas of the ship that were never meant to be accessed by passengers or prisoners. Jake's years of crawling through caves and climbing through dense forest had taught him how to move silently in tight spaces. His body was lean and flexible from outdoor living, able to squeeze through openings that would stop larger people. His hands were tough from working with rough materials, letting him grip metal edges without cutting himself. The first thing Jake needed was information about the ship's layout. He followed air currents toward what felt like a central area and found himself looking down through a grate into a large room filled with control panels and display screens. Several aliens worked at stations, their long fingers dancing over surfaces that glowed with colored symbols. Jake studied the room carefully. The aliens were clearly running the ship from here, monitoring systems and making course corrections. More importantly, the displays showed what looked like maps of space with moving points of light. Jake was probably looking at the ship's navigation center, which meant he could learn where they were going and how to change course, but first he needed to deal with the ship's crew. Jake was outnumbered by dozens of aliens, each one larger and stronger than him. Fighting them directly would be suicide. Instead, he needed to use the same tactics that had kept humans alive when facing larger predators: Strike from hiding and use the environment as a weapon. Jake continued exploring through the ventilation system until he found what he was looking for. The ship's life support center was located deep in the vessel's core, a room filled with machines that cleaned the air and maintained atmospheric pressure. The aliens had built amazing technology, but they still needed to breathe, just like humans. Jake did not plan to hurt the aliens or damage their breathing systems. He was not a killer and he needed the ship's life support to stay alive too. But he knew from studying natural ecosystems that even small changes could create big effects if applied at the right time and place. Using techniques learned from traditional brewing and fermentation, Jake began making subtle adjustments to the ship's waste processing systems. He introduced organic materials from his own body and food scraps into recycling units where they would break down in specific ways. The changes were tiny, but they would create gas buildups that would trigger the ship's emergency safety systems. Jake's plan was not to create an explosion or poison anyone. Instead, he wanted to force the aliens to deal with multiple system failures that would divide their attention and create opportunities for him to move more freely through the ship. Every emergency would require repair teams, and every repair team would be focused on technical problems. Instead of searching for escaped prisoners, the first part of Jake's plan worked perfectly. Within hours of his sabotage, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The aliens responded with typical efficiency, sending teams to investigate and repair the apparent malfunctions. But while they were fixing one problem, Jake was already creating another in a different part of the ship. Jake moved through the ventilation system like a ghost, appearing in unexpected places to cause new troubles. He loosened connections in non-critical systems, blocked secondary air filters with debris, and created electrical shorts using improvised conductors made from bits of metal and moisture. None of the damage was serious enough to threaten the ship, but all of it required attention from the crew. The aliens began to realize they were dealing with something more than random system failures. Their escaped prisoner was not hiding somewhere waiting to be found. He was actively working against them, using their own ship as a weapon. Security teams started patrolling the corridors, but Jake was always somewhere else, moving through spaces they did not think to guard. Jake's greatest advantage was that the aliens thought like an advanced technological civilization. They expected their enemies to use advanced weapons and sophisticated tactics. They were not prepared to fight someone who used primitive methods combined with deep understanding of how complex systems worked. When Jake finally decided to rescue the other human prisoners, he had already turned large sections of the ship into chaos. Emergency lights flashed in corridors where repair teams worked frantically to fix problems that kept multiplying. The aliens were stressed and tired and making mistakes, exactly what Jake had planned. Jake had located the other prisoners. During his exploration of the ventilation system, 3 humans were being held in cells similar to his own, all in the same section of the ship. They would be scared and confused, but they were alive, and Jake knew that desperate people could be incredibly brave. If someone gave them hope and direction, the rescue itself was almost easy after all of Jake's preparation. The barriers holding the other prisoners were connected to the same power grid Jake had been studying for days. A few carefully placed shorts created cascading failures that brought down multiple containment systems at once. While alarms screamed and aliens rushed to restore power, Jake dropped through ceiling grates into the prison area. The other humans stared at him in shock as he appeared like some kind of action movie hero, but Jake quickly explained who he was and what was happening. He told them they had minutes to escape before the aliens restored their security systems, and that they needed to follow his orders exactly if they wanted to survive. Jake led the group of rescued humans back into the ventilation system, moving them through routes he had scouted and prepared. The other prisoners were not trained for this kind of work, but fear gave them strength, and Jake's calm confidence helped them push through spaces that seemed impossible to navigate. As they crawled through the ship's hidden passages, Jake was already planning the next phase of his strategy. Escaping from their cells was just the beginning. Now he had to figure out how to get 4 humans safely back to Earth while dealing with an entire ship full of aliens who were probably very angry about being outsmarted by primitive creatures. Jake led the 3 other humans through the ship's ventilation system to a storage area he had discovered during his exploration. The room was filled with supplies and equipment the aliens used for their research, giving the group a temporary, safe place to rest and plan their next moves. Lisa Chun was a college student who had been camping alone when the aliens took her. She was scared but smart, and Jake could see she understood computers and electronic devices. Peter Johnson was a truck driver with strong hands and practical knowledge about how machines worked. Mary Williams was a school teacher who was good at staying calm under pressure and helping others follow instructions. Jake quickly explained their situation. They were on an alien spaceship traveling away from Earth at incredible speed. The aliens thought humans were primitive and harmless, which had been their mistake. Now, the 4 humans needed to work together to take control of the ship and force the aliens to return them home. The other humans stared at Jake like he was crazy. Take control of an alien spaceship, force advanced beings to obey them. It sounded impossible. But Jake had learned during his wilderness training that many things seemed impossible until you broke them down into smaller, manageable steps. Jake showed them what he had discovered about the ship's systems. The aliens relied completely on their technology, which made them powerful but also vulnerable. Their ship was designed for efficiency and comfort, not for dealing with sabotage from primitive creatures who understood basic engineering principles. The first step was gaining access to the ship's food production systems. Jake had found these areas during his earlier exploration and realized they were the key to controlling the alien crew. The aliens grew their nutrition in carefully controlled environments, using hydroponic systems that were incredibly advanced but also incredibly delicate. Lisa proved to be excellent at understanding the electronic controls that managed the growing systems. Her computer skills translated surprisingly well to alien technology once Jake showed her the basic patterns. Peter's mechanical knowledge helped them figure out how to adjust the physical components without breaking anything important. Jake used his knowledge of plant biology and natural chemistry to make specific changes to the growing environment. He did not want to poison the aliens or destroy their food supply completely. Instead, he wanted to create conditions that would make them sick enough to be weakened, but not sick enough to die. The changes Jake made were subtle but effective. He adjusted the mineral content of the nutrient solutions to create compounds that would cause digestive problems for the aliens. He introduced beneficial bacteria that were harmless to humans but would create uncomfortable reactions in alien physiology. He modified the atmospheric controls to change gas concentrations in ways that would affect alien metabolism. Mary helped coordinate their activities and kept watch for alien patrols while Jake and the others worked. Her teaching experience made her good at organizing group efforts and making sure everyone understood their roles. She also proved to be brave under pressure, staying calm even when alien security teams came close to discovering their hiding places. The effects of Jake's sabotage began showing within hours. The aliens started experiencing stomach problems and fatigue that made them less efficient at their jobs. They assumed it was some kind of contamination in their food systems and sent teams to investigate and clean everything. But the problems kept getting worse because Jake was continuing to make new adjustments faster than they could find and fix the old ones. While the aliens dealt with their food crisis, Jake moved to the next phase of his plan. He had studied the ship's power distribution systems and identified the key nodes that controlled different sections of the vessel. By creating carefully timed failures in these systems, he could force the aliens to divide their attention between multiple emergencies. Jake taught the other humans how to create simple but effective sabotage devices using materials found throughout the ship. Pieces of metal could be shaped into wedges that would jam mechanical systems. Organic materials could be placed in air filters to create blockages. Water and metal together could create electrical shorts that would disable control panels. The key was coordination and timing. Jake had learned from hunting and trapping that success came from understanding your target's behavior and striking at exactly the right moment. The aliens were predictable in their responses to emergencies, sending specific teams to deal with specific problems in specific ways. Jake used this predictability against them. When they sent a team to fix power problems in one section, he would create new problems in a different section that required the same specialists. When they gathered all their technical experts in the engineer areas, he would cause failures in the life support systems that needed immediate attention. Peter proved to be excellent at understanding how the alien machinery worked once Jake showed him the basic principles. His experience with truck engines and hydraulic systems gave him insight into the ship's mechanical components. He could create breakdowns that looked like normal equipment failures, but were actually carefully planned sabotage. The aliens began to realize they were under attack, but they could not understand how primitive humans were outmaneuvering their advanced technology. Their security teams searched for the escaped prisoners, but Jake had taught the group how to move through the ship using routes and methods the aliens never considered. Jake's greatest insight was understanding that the aliens thought like a highly organized technological society. They expected their enemies to use advanced weapons and follow predictable military tactics. They were completely unprepared to fight opponents who used guerrilla methods and turned everyday systems into weapons. After several days of systematic sabotage, large sections of the ship were operating at reduced efficiency. The aliens were exhausted from dealing with constant crises and frustrated by their inability to locate and stop the humans. Their carefully planned research mission had turned into a nightmare of cascading failures and mysterious problems. Jake decided it was time for the final phase of his strategy. He had identified the ship's communication systems and learned enough about their technology to send a message that would be heard by other alien vessels. The message would not be a call for help or a threat of violence. Instead, it would be something much more powerful. A warning that would protect Earth from future alien interference. Jake had realized during his time aboard the ship that the aliens were not evil or deliberately cruel. They were scientists and explorers who genuinely believed humans were primitive animals that could be studied without moral concerns. They had taken humans the same way human scientists might capture wild animals for research, thinking they were dealing with creatures too simple to understand what was happening to them. The message Jake planned to send would correct that misunderstanding in a way the aliens could never ignore. He would prove that humans were not primitive animals but dangerous intelligent beings who could turn any environment into a weapon and any technology into a tool for their own purposes. But first, Jake needed to complete his takeover of the ship. The aliens were weakened and distracted, but they still controlled the navigation systems and the weapons. Jake and his team had proven they could cause chaos and confusion, but now they needed to demonstrate they could actually control the vessel and force it to return to Earth. Jake gathered his team in a secure area near the ship's main computer core. This was where the real battle would be fought, not with weapons or violence, but with intelligence and determination. The aliens were about to learn what happened when an advanced civilization made the mistake of underestimating the most adaptable and resourceful species in the galaxy. The humans were no longer prisoners aboard an alien ship. They had become the hunters, and the ship itself had become their hunting ground. Every system, every corridor, every piece of technology was now a potential weapon in the hands of creatures who had learned to survive by turning any environment to their advantage. Jake Morrison and his team were about to show the aliens what it really meant to be human. Jake and his team reached the ship's main computer center during the deepest part of the night cycle when most of the alien crew were resting. The constant emergencies and system failures had exhausted the aliens, leaving only skeleton crews to monitor the ship's operations. This was exactly what Jake had planned. The computer center was larger than Jake had expected, filled with displays and control surfaces that pulsed with soft-colored lights. The technology was far beyond anything humans had created, but Jake had learned that all complex systems followed basic rules. Every machine needed power, every network needed connections, and every control system had weak points if you knew how to find them. Lisa immediately went to work studying the computer interfaces while Peter examined the physical components of the systems. Mary kept watch at the entrance and monitored the corridors for any sign of approaching aliens. Jake moved between all of them, coordinating their efforts and applying his understanding of how the ship's systems were connected. The first challenge was getting past the alien security systems that protected their computers from unauthorized access, but Jake had been studying these systems for days and he had noticed something important. The aliens had designed their security to prevent other advanced civilizations from hacking their technology. They had never considered that primitive creatures might try to physically bypass their electronic defenses, using techniques learned from basic electrical work. Jake showed Peter how to trace power connections and identify the physical components that control the computer security systems. Instead of trying to hack through software protections, they simply removed power from the security hardware, creating gaps in the ship's defenses that Lisa could exploit with her computer skills. Within hours, they had gained access to the ship's navigation systems. The displays showed their current position in space, several light years from Earth and moving steadily away from home. But more importantly, the systems also showed how to reverse course and return to human space. The technology was alien, but the basic principles of navigation were universal. Jake made a decision that surprised the others. Instead of immediately changing course back to Earth, he accessed the ship's communication systems first. Jake had realized that simply escaping would not solve the larger problem. Other alien ships would eventually come to Earth, and they might not be as reasonable as this crew had been. Jake needed to send a message that would prevent future abductions. Using his understanding of the ship's computer network, Jake composed a transmission that would be broadcast to other alien vessels throughout this region of space. The message was carefully crafted to achieve specific goals, without causing unnecessary panic or hostility. Jake's message explained that the humans aboard this ship were not primitive specimens but representatives of a dangerous and highly adaptable species. The random specimen the aliens had collected was actually a trained survival expert, one of millions of humans who possessed similar skills. The other prisoners had proven equally capable of learning alien technology and turning it against their captors. The message included detailed records of everything the humans had accomplished aboard the ship: the systematic sabotage of multiple systems, the coordinated takeover of critical ship functions, and the successful bypass of advanced security measures. Jake wanted the aliens to understand that humans were not lucky or fortunate in their success. They were skilled and intelligent and extremely dangerous when threatened, but Jake also included a more hopeful element in his message. He explained that humans were willing to make peaceful contact with other civilizations, but only on equal terms. Any future attempts to abduct or study humans without permission would be met with the same kind of resistance this ship had experienced. However, formal diplomatic contact would be welcomed and reciprocated. The message was transmitted just as the alien crew discovered the humans had taken control of their computer systems. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship and security teams rushed toward the computer center. But Jake and his team were already implementing the next phase of their plan, using their control of the ship's systems. Jake initiated a controlled shutdown of non-essential functions throughout the vessel. Life support remained active, but lighting dropped to minimum levels, artificial gravity was reduced to about half normal, and most of the automated systems switched to emergency power mode. The ship remained safe and habitable but became much less comfortable for its crew. The aliens found themselves dealing with a completely new kind of problem. The humans had not destroyed their ship or hurt anyone aboard, but they had effectively taken control of the vessel and made it clear they could make life very difficult for anyone who opposed them. The aliens could try to fight back, but they would be fighting an enemy who understood their own ship better than they did. Jake opened communication with the alien commander, speaking through the ship's internal communication system. His message was simple and direct. The humans wanted to be returned to Earth immediately. In exchange, they would restore the ship to normal operation and cause no further damage. They would also share some of their knowledge about human capabilities. with the alien crew helping prevent future misunderstandings between their species. The alien commander, faced with a ship full of failing systems and a crew suffering from mysterious illnesses, had little choice but to agree to Jake's terms. The aliens had come to Earth expecting to collect primitive specimens for study. Instead, they had encountered a species that could turn any environment into a weapon and any technology into a tool for their own purposes. The journey back to Earth took several days, during which Jake and his team worked alongside the alien crew to restore the ship's systems and help the aliens recover from their illnesses. The experience was educational for both species. The aliens learned to respect human adaptability and intelligence, while the humans gained insight into advanced technology and alien psychology. Jake used the time to study the aliens' scientific methods and their reasons for collecting specimens from other worlds. He learned that they were genuinely interested in understanding other forms of life, not in conquering or exploiting them. Their mistake had been assuming that technological development was the only measure of intelligence and capability. When the ship finally reached Earth's solar system, Jake made one final demonstration of human resourcefulness. Using techniques learned from his wilderness survival training, he had created a detailed map of the ship's internal structure using nothing but sound analysis and careful observation. He presented this map to the alien commander as a gift, showing how humans could understand complex systems. Even without advanced instruments, the aliens released their human prisoners in the same Montana wilderness where Jake had been captured weeks earlier. The ship departed immediately after, carrying Jake's message and a new understanding of what humanity represented. The incident was classified at the highest levels of alien government, and Earth was marked as a world requiring special diplomatic protocols for any future contact. Jake helped his fellow survivors adjust to their return to normal life. Lisa went back to college but changed her major to include xenobiology and interstellar communication. Peter returned to truck driving but also began teaching practical engineering skills to survival groups. Mary resumed teaching but incorporated lessons about adaptability and creative problem-solving into her curriculum. Jake himself completed his book on wilderness survival, though he never mentioned his alien adventure directly. Instead, he included subtle references to adapting to completely unknown environments and turning unfamiliar technologies to your advantage. The survival community began incorporating new techniques that seemed almost too advanced for primitive methods, but Jake never explained their true origin. Years later, when the first official diplomatic contact was made between Earth and the Alien Confederation, the human negotiators found themselves in an unusually strong position. The aliens approached the talks with great respect for human capabilities and a clear understanding that Earth's inhabitants were not to be underestimated. The alien ambassador who led the first diplomatic mission was the same commander whose ship Jake had commandeered. During private conversations, the commander admitted that the encounter with Jake Morrison had fundamentally changed how their civilization viewed other species. They had learned that intelligence and capability took many forms and that technological advancement was not the only measure of a species' worth. Jake Morrison never became famous for his role in first contact between humans and aliens. Most people never learned that a single man with wilderness survival skills had protected Earth from hostile alien contact and paved the way for peaceful diplomatic relations. But throughout the survival and bushcraft community, stories spread about techniques that seemed to work in any environment, no matter how strange or hostile the aliens had come to Earth, thinking they were collecting primitive specimens from a backward world. Instead, they had encountered the most adaptable and resourceful species in the galaxy, beings who could turn any challenge into an opportunity and any environment into a home. They learned that humans were not advanced because of their technology, but because of their ability to adapt.